Professor, your visit to Russia and your participation in a number of meetings and events here actually brought to my mind a couple of questions which I want to address related to your concept, your vision of change and development and its impact on particular Russian agenda and particular Russian situation. First question I want to address is what is real opportunity for transformation which we can get from this transformative theory you presented and implement here, considering the institutional framework we do have here and considering a certain apathy in current youth and current, I would say in general, population of Russia, which is a result of certain historical and sociological background we have here. So did you have opportunity to realize, to understand, to appreciate the atmosphere around you during all these events you participated and talks, and which helped you to understand better how to implement the theory, how to put this agenda into the real political and social process of development of Russia? What forces do you see as potentially able to realize this agenda, and what forces you see as most resilient, most hostile to this innovative approach of development here in Russia?
All around the world, there is a desire for alternatives. The whole world is now bent under the yoke of a dictatorship of no alternatives. So the world is searching. At the same time, however, all over the world, there is also great disenchantment with public life and a tendency to abandon the realm of the private in favor of the cultivation of purely private interests. I am convinced that any significant initiative in the transformation of the established institutional structures could produce a sudden change of attitude in any of our countries. For over 200 years now, ideological debate in much of the world has been dominated by a simple hydraulic model, an inverse relation between the market and the state. More state, less market, or more market and less state. The last great institutional and ideological innovation in the world was what you could describe as the social democratic compromise of the mid-20th century. The forces that challenged the established order of power and production, especially the leftist and progressive forces, abandoned this challenge. And in exchange for this renunciation of the threat, the state was allowed to acquire the power to regulate, to redistribute, and to manage the economy countercyclically. Now, none of the fundamental problems of the contemporary societies can be resolved within the limits of the established institutional framework. I therefore see a recurrent theme in the ideological and institutional debates around the globe. The theme is the reshaping of the institutional forms of democracy, of the market economy, and of independent civil society.
I think it is interesting to inquire further and to first ask, where do you see the parallels between the country which you have studied most, which is Brazil, and where you have been active also politically or are still politically active, and a country like Russia, and how do you compare these realities from your point of view to the centers of the global development?
There is only one universal orthodoxy in the world today. In recent years, it has sometimes been described as neoliberalism or the Washington Consensus. The heresies are local deviations from this universal orthodoxy. My belief is that a universal orthodoxy can be successfully combated only by universalizing heresies, as liberalism and socialism were in the 19th century. We cannot combat a universal orthodoxy with merely local heresies. Now then the question becomes, what is the main impulse that could direct this universalizing heresy? It must be the creation of institutional arrangements that can equip the majority of ordinary men and women, that can give them opportunities and instruments for creative and constructive action in the world. In my country, Brazil, the most important social phenomenon of recent years is the emergence, alongside the traditional middle class, of a new middle class that comes from below. A dark-skinned middle class of millions of people who struggle to open or maintain small businesses, who study at night, and who inaugurate in the country a culture of self-help and initiative. The majority of poor Brazilians wants to follow this vanguard. Therefore, the great revolution would be the use of the powers of the state to create practical conditions that would permit the majority to follow this emergent petty bourgeois vanguard. Now, we cannot do that simply through the reallocation of resources or through compensatory social programs. We can do that only through institutional initiatives that would change the structure of economic opportunity and of political action. Now you ask, what are the triggers? What are the practical occasions that would permit these institutional initiatives to be established? Let me give you two examples. One example is the need in our countries, and I'm thinking now of Brazil and of Russia, to organize a strategy of development that enables us more successfully to overcome our dependence on primary production, on the production and export of commodities or the extraction of natural resources. We would have to establish a technological vanguard of production in such a way that this vanguard would not be an isolated enclave, but would rather be a lever to help transform other sectors of the economy. On the one hand, to transform the character of agriculture and of natural resource extraction, and on the other hand, to create a new style of idea-rich, radically innovative manufacturing. A second example of the occasion to do this is the transition that is already taking place in the world in the organization of production. The dominant form of production in the 20th century was mass production, which we sometimes call Fordism, and it is now being replaced by styles of production that have a completely different character. They are characterized by permanent innovation, by the attenuation of the contrast between supervision and execution, by the use of machines to permit non-formulaic, non-repetitious labor. The trouble is that these advanced forms of production are characteristically limited to advanced sectors only weakly linked to the rest of the national economy. So we have to change the form of the market economy. We have to create a form of the market economy that allows for decentralized coordination between the government and networks of small and medium-sized businesses, and that promotes cooperative competition among these small and medium-sized businesses. Now, what is that an example of? It's an example of the institutional transformation of the market economy. It's not simply regulating the market. It's not simply moderating the inequalities generated in the market. It's changing the institutional content of the market. That's what we must do in our countries in every domain of social life. Not only must we reorganize the market economy, we must also reshape the institutional forms of civil society and of democratic politics.
Just to follow up on what you have said before, the current discussion in the world about the crisis and how to overcome the crisis seems to focus on two things. One is growth in a very generic way, and the other is expansion of employed labor. Your response as to what a course of development of a alternative project might be seems to fundamentally challenge the idea of having labor in the traditional form of wage labor as the future model of organizing production.
If we look far ahead into the future, to envisage a direction of progressive change in economic life, we have reason to make three sets of commitments that are overlapping. The first commitment has to do with the character of free labor. As you imply, the predominance of economically dependent wage labor as the main form of free labor is not something natural or necessary. In the 19th century, it was an almost universal conviction of liberals as well as socialists that wage labor could be accepted only as a transitory compromise. In the direction of ensuring the predominance of self-employment and cooperation, or some combination between them, as the dominant forms of free labor. The second long-term change in the character of economic life that we should desire is to change the relationship between machines and people. Everything that we have learned how to repeat, we can express in a formula, and everything that we can express in a formula, we can embody in a physical apparatus, a machine. The purpose of a machine is to do everything that we have learned how to repeat, so that our most important resource, time, can be reserved for those things which we have not yet learned how to repeat. And thus, human life can be devoted more intensely to creative activity. Now then comes the third dimension of this long-term direction in the change of the character of economic life. And that is that changes like these that we've been exploring cannot advance if the market economy is fastened to a single dogmatic version of itself. The tendency of conservative economic and legal thought is to think that the market economy has a single natural and necessary form. A market is a market, property is property, and contract is contract. The truth is that a market economy can take radically different forms, and what we should desire is that alternative regimes of private and social property, for example, might come to coexist experimentally within the same market economy. Now, all of this is a long-term future in the realm of economic life. And the question is, what are the initial steps by which we might begin to move in such a direction? I think that one opportunity which the historical moment gives us is to overcome in our economies the dependence on primary production and to establish post-Fordist advanced production in a form that is socially inclusive, that incorporates a large part of the labor force rather than being restricted to small, isolated vanguards. So then we come to the short term rather than the long term. The short term innovations in the character of the market economy would first expand the range of institutions organizing the relationship between governments and firms, especially small and medium-sized firms. We shouldn't choose between arm's length regulation of business by government and imposition by the state of a unitary trade and industrial policy. There should be a form of strategic coordination that is decentralized, pluralistic, and experimental, to the end of disseminating in the national economy the advanced practices of production. Second, we should create structures that make it possible for these small and medium-sized enterprises to compete against one another and to cooperate at the same time, pooling resources and achieving economies of scale. And third, we should innovate in the arrangements governing the relationship between finance and the real economy, so that finance is made to serve the productive agenda of society rather than being allowed, as it now is, to serve itself.
This program of development seems to challenge two fundamental notions which are posed as alternatives in orthodox political and economic discourse, and this is the juxtaposition of state and society, of civil society. And because of the prevailing confusion in such orthodox discussions, very often market is a synonym of civil society. So it's market versus state, state versus civil society. You challenge this false alternative.
I do believe that this imperative of institutional innovation applies in every domain of social life, not just in the reorganization of the economy, but also in the reshaping of independent civil society and of democratic politics. Let me take a step back and attempt to clarify the larger ideological perspective from which I'm making this argument. Today in the world, the institutionally conservative social democrats and their theoreticians affirm that the overriding objective of the progressives or the leftists should be the promotion of equality. But they combine this theoretical egalitarianism with an acceptance of the established institutional frameworks. That combination means that the egalitarian commitment in practice is reduced to the attempt to moderate inequalities through compensatory and retrospective redistribution. Now compare that perspective to the dominant standpoint of the liberals and the socialists in the 19th century. First, they did not believe that the supreme objective is equality. They viewed the egalitarian commitment as subsidiary to a larger concern with the lifting up of the capabilities, of the scope, of the intensity of life for ordinary men and women. The objective was not equality, it was greatness. And equality was subordinate to greatness. And they all had an institutional project, a project for the transformation of the structure of society. Their idea of human empowerment was too narrowly framed on the model of the aristocratic notion of self-possession. And their institutional program was in every instance some dogmatic formula. For the liberals, a particular regime of free society. For the socialists, the supersession of the market by state control. We can't simply reproduce their dogmas. But I assert that we too, in our historical circumstance, must accord priority to this ideal of empowerment and greatness, and must have a project for the institutional transformation of society. Of the market, which is what we just discussed, but also of civil society and of democratic politics. We need institutional arrangements that provide a practical basis for social cohesion and solidarity, more substantial than simply money transfers organized by the state. Some form of direct responsibility to take care of other people outside the boundaries of one's own family. For example, through mandatory social service. Some way of organizing the direct engagement of civil society in the competitive and experimental provision of social services. And when we come then to the reorganization of democratic politics, a third domain of institutional experimentalism, we need to create political institutions that are capable of mastering and transforming the established structures of social life, and that diminish the dependence of change on crisis. We need high energy democracies, democracies that increase the level of organized popular engagement in political life, that rapidly resolve impasse, hastening the pace of social change achieved through politics, and that allow different sectors of the federation or of the economy to create counter-models of the future. So these three vectors of institutional change, the economic, the social, and the political, have in common the liberation of humanity from its enslavement to the inherited structures of social life.
Okay, I'm sorry. Could I start with the questions then? Actually, I have a couple of those. One is related to human nature, which is a basis basically for your theory, as I understood it. You mentioned several very nice words, greatness, to diminish enslavement of human spirit or productivity, and energy, which would empower democracy and social cooperation. Those nice words, which are very good for political statements, but I kind of doubt opportunity to put it in this strict meaning into social, methodologically correct program. I mean, program of social transformation, which would be operational, practical, realizable. Why? I feel that my perception of real economic not just order, established institutional order, but a real economical realm, I would say. My interactions with people, my personal experience in doing business and in relations with employees, wage-paid employees, basically, and private entrepreneurs who are small and medium-sized businesses. And this experience and this perception doesn't really allow me to be ensured that release, I mean, if you change institutional arrangement with the purpose to release energy, you will get energy. So is there energy inside? Isn't that the major point we have to consider first? How potential is humanity in general and those masses of people who you want to bring into a cooperative, productive, innovative process? So why this concern, I think, is worth to consider. When you mentioned about the effect of transformation of Brazilian democracy, saying that small and medium-sized businesses are creating a new class of petit bourgeois who is a basis. I mean, this class is a basis for a new type of democracy in Brazil. I cannot say anything about petit bourgeois in Brazil, but I can say that in Russia, the new class, which was established through this last 20 years of transformation from socialistically stylized, social order, which didn't encourage consumption and private entrepreneurship, to more market-based, market-oriented form of social production and cooperation. So I can say that this petit bourgeois class here in Russia may be the most passive and full of apathy in sense of social transformation. So they do lack this energy which you want to use as a leverage for transformation. So giving more opportunities, wouldn't it be just useless? That's kind of first question. Do we have this energy to use? When you don't have energy, the whole institutional arrangement around it would be just hollow, So you can empty. You cannot fill it with a substance when people don't produce. Second point, related to the first one actually, is a portion of people who prefer stability against transformative energetic processes. So who prefer predictable and understandable framework for life, which because of certain maybe I will bring a not proper example, but when Darwin explained evolutionary process, he mentioned that those species who survived, they were not the smartest, they were not the best, but they were most flexible, and they tried to accustom themselves, feed themselves to changing reality. So those who could accommodate the environment better. So in my perception, and I think sociologists in the vast majority wouldn't contradict this in the understanding of social realm we live in, the majority of population would prefer a stable set of rules working more or less predictably in a strict or established framework, because they can accustom to this framework. They can fit their behavior to it, to forecast certain pros and cons of particular type of social behavior. In case you offer to humanity, to population in general, opportunity to permanently innovate, then wouldn't you just get a resistance from exactly those people whom you offer this opportunity? Wouldn't they opt in for wage type of employment rather than employment, self-employment through innovative entrepreneurship. So that's a question very much related to the first one, lack of energy, which we experience here in Russia, for example. I don't know about the Brazilian example, but our petit bourgeois class is the most passive class you can imagine. And a lot of people, a huge portion of people, would opt in for wage type of employment. And this thing is also related to the type of economy we want to build, because if we want to transform economic order from primary production to more innovative form of production, so then who would be employed, could we employ those people who cannot be involved into more innovative form of production? Because you have a huge portion of population who don't have skills, knowledge, and sometimes interest into involvement to those advanced forms of production. They prefer to be employed as a very how to say basic type of skilled workers. That's related to our discussion about growing population in Russia of Central Asian immigrants, like a huge portion of those people who didn't have sometimes even basic education from Central Asia countries coming to Russia. How could you accommodate them into this advanced form of economy? What can you offer them? Thank you.
You raise a set of issues that are philosophical and, in a sense, religious. They go far beyond the questions of political economy that were the object of the earlier part of our conversation. Life is the supreme good, and we squander this supreme resource, all of us, to a greater or lesser extent, in a sleepwalking. We are awakened from our slumbers by personal or national crisis, by calamities, by wars. And thus we go to our graves in a daze, having wasted a large part of the time of our existence. What we should desire is to die only once, rather than to die many small deaths. That is the reason for the overriding importance of any project that attempts to change our relationship to the structures of social life. We should not be the puppets of these structures, so that we can live. Now, in the 19th century, the liberals and the leftists alike, from John Stuart Mill to Karl Marx, believed that there is a pre-established harmony, an inevitable convergence between the conditions of our material progress and the conditions of our moral progress. We can no longer believe that. But we should not fall into the opposite dogma of supposing that there is a tragic contradiction between our material and our moral aspirations. We should look for those practical arrangements that exploit the zone of potential overlap or intersection between the institutional requirements of our material progress and the institutional requirements of our moral progress. The arrangements that are most likely to serve as a basis for both the development of our productive capabilities and our liberation from this enslavement to the structures are arrangements that turn these structures into self-correcting artifacts. They are arrangements that facilitate their own revision and that make it possible to produce change without needing crisis as the condition of change. So indeed, all of these proposals have in common an acceleration of existence. Now you say, but a large part of humanity is afraid or incapable. And it says, we don't want to be on the roller coaster. We don't want this adventure. We want security. Now, what is the answer? Part of the answer, as you yourself suggested, is to equip people. For example, through education, and through a particular form of education. It must be a form of education that is not oriented to the encyclopedia, to memory, or to information. Its methodological perspective must be analytic mastery and problem solving. It must use information selectively as an instrument for the acquisition of analytic powers. It must accord priority to cooperation in teaching and learning rather than the combination of individualism and authoritarianism. And above all, it must be dialectical in its approach to the received body of knowledge, exploring every subject from contrasting points of view. And thus we begin to form a humanity that is equipped to challenge and to change the established frameworks of social life. Another part of the answer to your concern is to protect people in a haven of endowments and interests so that they are not afraid of change. Consider as a metaphor, as an analogy, the relation of a parent to a child. The parent says to the child, I love you unconditionally. No matter what you do or what happens to you, my love for you is without limits. So the child is made to think that he has a secure place in the world. And then the parent says, therefore, now that I have given you this secure place, through my unconditional love, go forth and raise a storm in the world. Now, that relationship is precisely what we should attempt to establish in society. So we should give everyone in our societies universal endowments and guarantees so that they not feel or be threatened in the midst of innovation.